What if I told you that the secret to pepper plants so loaded with fruit, the branches snap under the weight, isn't some space-age fertilizer from a big box store, but a substance so ancient it appears in the very first book of the Bible? Most people don't know this, but the modern gardening industry has convinced you that you need a dozen different bottles of synthetic nutrients, each one a different color, each one promising the moon, while your ancestors were using a single, shockingly simple ingredient that makes all of them look like expensive water. I'm going to prove it to you. I've ranked 20 ancient, natural soil amendments and plant boosters straight from Scripture and the old ways, ranked from merely helpful to the single most explosive growth accelerator you will ever pour on your garden. You don't want to miss number 13 on this list, a substance so precious in the ancient world that it was literally used as currency and temple incense. And modern agronomy now shows it triggers a systemic immune response in plants that makes them produce up to 40% more fruit. And number 20, the final item, involves a common kitchen scrap you are probably throwing away this week. A practice the Israelites were commanded to do to their soil that modern soil science reveals unlocks a hidden phosphorus reservoir in your dirt that your pepper roots are starving for right now. Before we dig into this list, if you want to rediscover the genuine, powerful, forgotten ways of growing and healing that modern science is only just validating, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Every week, we bridge the ancient wisdom of Scripture with the latest clinical and agricultural research to transform your health and your homestead. Here are 20 ancient soil secrets ranked from surprisingly effective to the single greatest pepper explosion you have ever witnessed in your life. Number 20. Wood ash, the resurrection dust of the ancient hearth. In the book of Leviticus, the laws given to the Israelites for purification often involved the complete burning of an offering, reducing it to a fine gray ash that was then handled with reverence and specific ritual. To a modern mind, ash is just a waste product, a mess to be swept up and bagged for the trash collector. But to an ancient farmer, that ash was a sacred return of minerals to the soil, a gift from the fire that completed the cycle of life. I remember the first time I scattered wood ash around my struggling pepper plants, the gray powder settling on the dark soil like a strange snow. Within 2 weeks, the leaves deepened in color and the stems thickened noticeably. Modern science has caught up and explained exactly why. Wood ash is primarily calcium carbonate, the same active ingredient as agricultural lime, but it also contains a powerful dose of potassium, or potash, and a full spectrum of trace minerals that the tree pulled from deep in the subsoil over decades of growth. Those minerals include magnesium, phosphorus, and even small amounts of boron and manganese, elements that a shallow-rooted pepper plant could never access on its own. For pepper plants, potassium is the key to fruit production. It quite literally regulates the opening and closing of the stomata, the tiny pores on the leaves that control gas exchange, and it drives the movement of sugars from the leaves into the developing peppers. A clinical study on Capsicum annuum showed that potassium deficiency results in thin-walled small fruit that lacks color and has poor shelf life. The peppers literally cannot transport the sweetness they are manufacturing in their leaves down into the fruit, without potassium acting as the truck driver. Here's the traditional use. You never use ash from treated lumber, charcoal briquettes with lighter fluid, or glossy paper. Those contain heavy metals and chemical binders that will poison your soil. Only clean, untreated hardwood ash, the kind from a fireplace where you burn oak, maple, or fruit woods. Once your peppers have begun to flower, lightly sprinkle a thin, dusty ring of ash around the drip line of the plant, not piled against the stem, and gently scratch it into the top inch of soil with your fingertips. Then water it in slowly, letting the water carry those minerals down into the root zone. A word of caution. Wood ash is alkaline, so do not use it if your soil pH is already above 7. A simple soil test kit will tell you if your soil is acidic, which is common in areas with heavy rainfall. This ash is a gentle corrective. Think of it as a slow-release mineral cocktail that also sweetens acidic soil, creating the exact pH sweet spot between 6 and 6.8, where pepper roots can absorb every other nutrient you give them. A resurrection of the tree's life force now feeding the next generation of fruit. Number 19. Fish scraps. The buried blessing from the Sea of Galilee. When Jesus fed the multitudes, fish was the centerpiece of the miracle, a symbol of abundance and provision. In ancient agrarian societies, nothing from the harvest of the sea was wasted. The offal, bones, heads, and scales were returned to the land, buried in the fields to rot and feed the soil. I have stood in my garden with a bucket of fish heads from a day of cleaning the catch, the sharp, briny smell filling the air, and I have dug them into the earth with the strange certainty that I was participating in something ancient and true. We have forgotten this. We strip the fillet and send the rest to a landfill, and then wonder why our soil is dead. Modern science lays it bare. Fish protein, when broken down by soil microbes, releases a massive blast of nitrogen in a slow-release, organic form that will not burn your plants like synthetic urea. The amino acids in fish tissue are broken down by bacteria into ammonium and then nitrate, a steady, sustained feeding that lasts for weeks, not the fast, forced spike of a chemical fertilizer. But more importantly, fish bones are rich in phosphorus and calcium. A field trial conducted on tomato plants, which are close relatives of peppers, demonstrated that fish bone meal increased root mass by nearly 30%. For peppers, a robust root system is the engine for everything else. More roots mean more water uptake, more nutrient scavenging, and a plant that can support a canopy of 50 peppers without wilting in the afternoon heat. Here's the traditional use. When you transplant your pepper seedling into the garden, dig the hole a little deeper than you normally would, maybe 12 inches instead of 8. Drop a small handful of raw fish scraps, a sardine, some fish heads or the guts, right into the bottom of the hole. Cover that with 2 inches of pure soil so the roots do not touch it directly. Place your seedling on top and fill the hole. By the time the roots reach that pocket, the soil microbiology will have broken it down into a feast of amino acids and phosphorus. A practical note: if you have raccoons, possums, or dogs that dig, bury it at least a foot deep and tamp the soil firmly. The smell dissipates within days as the microbes do their work. Think of it as an underground battery pack of pure, slow-release energy that powers your plant from the roots up. A buried blessing that silently fuels explosive growth while you sleep. Number 18. Eggshells. The calcium fortress of the matriarch's kitchen. In Proverbs 31, the virtuous woman provides food for her household. The egg, a perfect package of life, has been a staple of the human diet since before recorded history. I think of my grandmother's kitchen, the worn wooden bowl where she collected eggshells after every breakfast, a habit born of the Depression when nothing, absolutely nothing, was thrown away. Yet in our modern, squeaky clean kitchens, we crack the egg, toss the shell, and rob our gardens of a fundamental building block. The science is clear. An eggshell is 95% calcium carbonate, but it also contains trace amounts of magnesium, potassium, and strontium, all in a matrix that soil microbes can slowly dissolve. Calcium is not just a nutrient for peppers. It is the literal structural integrity of the cell walls. A lack of calcium is why you get blossom end rot, that black, sunken leathery patch on the bottom of your peppers that breaks your heart when you turn the fruit over and see it. That is not a disease pathogen. It is not a fungus or a bacteria. It is a physiological calcium deficiency, a collapse of the cell walls at the fastest growing part of the fruit, because the plant could not transport enough calcium to keep up with the expansion. Here's the traditional use. Do not just throw them in the compost whole, because they will take years to break down. Rinse your eggshells, let them dry completely until they are brittle, and then crush them into a fine powder using a mortar and pestle or an old coffee grinder. The finer the particles, the faster soil microbes can break them down and release the calcium. I keep a dedicated coffee grinder just for this purpose, and the resulting powder is as fine as flour. Sprinkle a generous tablespoon of this powder into the planting hole and mix it with the soil. As the season progresses, side dress your plants with more, scratching it into the soil surface. This calcium is released slowly, exactly as the peppers demand it for cell wall construction. Think of it as the brick and mortar for every single cell in that pepper fruit, ensuring it grows firm, glossy, and without a single blemish. The patience of the matriarch now guarding the fruit of your labor. Number 17. Worm castings. The living soil of the original garden. Genesis describes the creation of man from the dust of the ground, a soil so alive and potent it could breathe life into flesh. Worm castings are the closest thing we have to that primordial, living dust. This is not dirt. This is earth that has passed through the digestive tract of a worm, and in that process, it has been transformed. I have opened a bag of fresh worm castings and held a handful to my nose. It smells like the forest floor after a rain, a deep, clean, living scent that no bagged potting mix can replicate. Modern agricultural science is stunned by this substance. The vermicomposting process inoculates the soil with a microbial population orders of magnitude more diverse than surrounding soil. These bacteria produce plant growth hormones, cytokinins and auxins, that act like a natural steroid for your peppers, triggering cell division and elongation. Furthermore, the mucus coating on the castings is hydrophilic, meaning it absorbs and holds water like a microscopic sponge, swelling to many times its dry weight, and then slowly releasing that moisture to the roots. This protects your plants from drought stress in the brutal heat of July when you cannot water every day. Here's the traditional use. You do not need much. A handful of pure worm castings mixed into the top few inches of soil around each pepper plant at the time of flowering will trigger a visible growth spurt. Or you can steep a cup of castings in a gallon of water for 24 hours, stirring occasionally, creating a compost tea that is absolutely alive and teeming with beneficial bacteria. Water it in directly at the base of the plant. Think of it as a transfusion of life itself, delivering billions of beneficial workers directly to the root zone to unlock nutrients you did not even know were in your soil. A restoration of that original, living dust that was always meant to feed us. Number 16. Comfrey leaves. The bone-knitting accelerator of the field. The prophet Isaiah speaks of a time when the desert shall blossom like a rose. Comfrey is the plant that makes that possible. In ancient European herbalism, its old name was knitbone, because a poultice of the leaves could literally speed the knitting of fractured bones. That same profound, deep driving life force is what makes it the perfect green manure for peppers. I grow a patch of comfrey in the corner of my garden, and it is a monster of a plant, with leaves that grow as long as my arm and a taproot that I have never been able to dig to the bottom of. The science is extraordinary. Comfrey has a taproot that can drill down 10 feet or more into the subsoil, mining minerals that are completely inaccessible to shallow-rooted annuals like peppers. It hyperaccumulates potassium, but also pulls up silica, calcium, and magnesium from layers of earth that have not been touched by surface weathering in centuries. When you harvest the leaves, they are a nutrient-dense powerhouse that contains allantoin, a compound that stimulates cell proliferation. Here's the traditional use. You can simply chop a handful of fresh comfrey leaves and lay them on the soil surface around your peppers as a mulch. As they break down, they feed the plant. But the most powerful method is to pack a bucket full of comfrey leaves, fill it with water, cover it, and let it rot for 2 to 3 weeks. The smell is fierce, a deep, anaerobic stench that will make you recoil, but the resulting black liquid is a potassium concentrate that will make your peppers set fruit like crazy. Dilute it until it looks like weak tea and water at the base of the plant. Think of it as a deep earth mineral mining operation, bringing the buried treasure of the subsoil up to the surface and depositing it right at the feet of your hungry peppers, a plant that sacrifices its own massive leaves to feed the smaller, more fragile ones that bear your harvest. Number 15. Seaweed. The salt spray blessing of the Mediterranean coast. The Bible is filled with images of the sea, a vast, teeming source of life. In coastal communities from Ireland to Israel, seaweed has been gathered and spread on fields for millennia. It is not just a fertilizer. It is a hormonal trigger for your pepper plants to enter a state of hyper-productivity. I have walked a beach after a storm, the rack line piled high with tangled, rubbery kelp, and gathered it in sacks to bring home to my garden. The smell of drying seaweed is the smell of the ocean itself, a concentrated brine of life. Modern science has isolated the mechanism. Seaweed contains cytokinins, auxins, and gibberellins, which are plant growth hormones that tell the plant to branch more, flower more, and set more fruit. It also contains mannitol, a sugar alcohol that acts as a chelating agent, making locked-up soil minerals available to the plant by binding to them and escorting them through the cell wall. A study on pepper plants treated with seaweed extract showed a significant increase in chlorophyll content, which means darker green leaves and a higher rate of photosynthesis. Here's the traditional use. You must wash the salt off thoroughly if you are gathering fresh seaweed. Salt will kill your soil biology and burn your plants. Rinse it in fresh water until it no longer tastes salty to the tongue. Then lay it as a thick mulch around your peppers. It will dry and crust over, suppressing weeds and slowly releasing its hormones. Or you can buy a cold-pressed seaweed extract and apply it as a foliar spray, misting the leaves in the early morning when the stomata are open. The stomata on the underside of the leaves absorb it directly. Think of it as a direct line of communication, telling your pepper plant in its own chemical language that it is time to stop holding back and start producing a harvest of biblical proportions, a message from the sea that the land plants have understood for millions of years. Number 14. Urine. The golden water of the desert nomad. This is the one that makes modern people recoil, but stay with me, because the science is undeniable. In the ancient world, nothing was wasted, especially not a substance rich in the most critical plant nutrient for leafy growth. The nomads of the desert knew that where they made camp, the ground would be fertile for years afterward. Urine is not a toxic waste product when it leaves a healthy body. It is a sterile, aqueous solution of urea, which is the backbone of the entire modern synthetic nitrogen fertilizer industry. The only difference is that synthetic urea is made from natural gas in a factory, while yours is made by your kidneys. Clinical research comparing human urine fertilizer to synthetic urea on vegetable crops has found identical, and sometimes superior, yields. Urine contains nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, the NPK of every fertilizer bag you have ever bought. Here's the traditional use. It must be diluted. A ratio of 1 part urine to 10 parts water is safe and effective. Apply it to the soil, not the leaves, during the early vegetative growth stage of your peppers, before they are heavily fruiting. You want that nitrogen to build a massive, sturdy plant structure that can later hold dozens of peppers. Stop once flowering begins, because too much nitrogen at that stage will give you all leaves and no fruit. The plant will stay in its vegetative phase and refuse to transition to reproduction. A practical note. If you are on any prescription medications, do not use your urine in the garden. Those compounds can pass through and accumulate in the soil. Think of it as the original DIY liquid nitrogen, a perfect, renewable resource that your plants are literally starving for while you flush it away with gallons of pristine drinking water, a closed loop that the modern world has broken. Number 13. Frankincense resin, the sacred tears of the temple incense. We are now entering the truly extraordinary, the substances that were so valued in the ancient world they were fit for a king. Frankincense was one of the gifts brought to the infant Jesus by the Magi, a treasure on par with gold. It was burned in the Temple of Jerusalem as a holy offering, the smoke rising as a symbol of prayer and intercession. Why would you put it in your garden? Because modern science has revealed that frankincense resin, the hardened sap of the boswellia tree, contains boswellic acids. These are potent terpenes that trigger a plant's systemic acquired resistance. This is the plant's own immune system, a cascade of defensive responses that normally activates when a pathogen attacks. When you apply a diluted frankincense solution, the plant perceives a threat and mounts a massive defensive response, producing more volatile oils, thicker cell walls, and antioxidant compounds. In peppers, this translates directly into a dramatic increase in capsaicin production, which means hotter peppers, and a surge in fruit set as the plant shifts into a protective, reproductive overdrive. The plant, believing it is under attack, rushes to reproduce before it dies. Here's the traditional use. You will not be burning it. You will take a small piece of pure frankincense resin, grind it to a powder, and dissolve it in a tiny amount of high-proof alcohol, just enough to cover it. Then dilute that tincture in water, a few drops per gallon, and mist it on your pepper leaves at dusk. The results can be staggering. Think of it as a biochemical alarm bell, a sacred signal that tells the pepper plant to armor up and multiply, producing fruit that is denser, spicier, and packed with medicinal compounds, a gift worthy of a king now applied to the humble pepper. Number 12. Myrrh resin, the bitter balm of the anointing oil. Often paired with frankincense, myrrh was another gift to the Christ child and a primary ingredient in the holy anointing oil described in Exodus. It was used for purification, embalming, and healing wounds. Its role in the garden is just as profound. The active compounds in myrrh, called sesquiterpenes, are powerful antifungal and antibacterial agents. The modern pepper grower's worst enemies are fungal diseases like powdery mildew, fusarium wilt, and phytophthora root rot. These are the silent killers that wilt a healthy plant overnight. You walk out in the morning, and a plant that was vibrant the day before is now drooping, its leaves hanging like wet paper, and you know it is already too late. Myrrh resin, when applied as a soil drench or foliar spray, creates a protective biofilm on the root surface and leaf tissue. A study on the antifungal properties of myrrh oil showed it inhibits the growth of several common soil-borne pathogens by disrupting their cell membranes. Here's the traditional use. Similar to frankincense, a tiny amount of myrrh tincture diluted in water and applied to the base of the plant can protect the root zone from fungal attack. It is not a fertilizer. It is a shield. Think of it as a guardian at the gate of the root system, a bitter, protective barrier that pathogens cannot penetrate, allowing your pepper plant to channel all its energy into explosive growth instead of fighting off disease. The balm of the ancient priests now protecting your garden from invisible enemies. Number 11. Raw honey, the undying sweetness of the promised land. The phrase "a land flowing with milk and honey" appears in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, and Jeremiah. It was not a poetic accident. It was a nutritional promise. Honey is the only food that never spoils, and it is a biochemical marvel. Archaeologists have found pots of honey in Egyptian tombs that are still perfectly edible after 3,000 years. For plants, raw, unpasteurized honey is a rooting hormone and a microbial catalyst. It contains glucose oxidase, which produces low levels of hydrogen peroxide, a natural antiseptic that protects cuttings from rot. It also contains a host of B vitamins, amino acids, and minerals that feed the beneficial bacteria in your soil. Here's the traditional use for peppers. If you are cloning pepper plants from cuttings, dip the cut stem into raw honey before placing it in soil. The honey seals the wound and stimulates root cell division. As a soil drench, a tablespoon of raw honey dissolved in a gallon of warm, non-chlorinated water will trigger a bloom of mycorrhizal fungi, the symbiotic network that extends your pepper plant's root reach by 100 times. A word of caution: do not overuse it. Too much sugar in the soil can feed the wrong kinds of bacteria and create an imbalance. Once every 2 weeks is plenty. Think of it as a feast for the invisible workforce in your soil, a burst of pure energy that wakes up the entire ecosystem and links your pepper plant into a vast underground web of nutrient exchange, the sweetness of the promised land now flowing through the roots of your garden. Number 10. Fermented plant juice. The pottage of the prophets. Remember Esau and his birthright. He sold it for a bowl of red lentil stew, a fermented, cooked, broken-down meal that his body knew was more valuable than an abstract promise. Fermentation is the alchemy of nature, breaking down complex structures into simple, bioavailable power. The ancient farmers of every culture knew to ferment weeds, comfrey, nettles, and fruit scraps into liquid plant food. I have a row of buckets behind my shed, each one a different fermenting brew, and the bubbles that rise to the surface are the visible sign of invisible work being done. Modern science shows that the lactobacillus bacteria in a properly fermented plant juice digest the plant matter, converting insoluble minerals into a form that roots can instantly absorb. It also produces enzymes and organic acids that act as a biostimulant. Here's the traditional use. Fill a bucket with chopped, nutrient-rich weeds, like nettles, chickweed, and dandelion greens. Cover with water. Add a handful of leaf mold as a starter to introduce the right bacteria, and let it sit for 2 weeks. Strain the liquid. This is a complete, living fertilizer. Dilute it and water your peppers. The difference is that synthetic fertilizer is a blunt instrument. This is a full orchestra, providing not just NPK but also hormones, enzymes, and beneficial microbes. Think of it as a pre-digested, living meal for your plants, the same way a pot of bone broth is more nourishing to a sick human than a dry cracker, a fermented pottage that satisfies a hunger your peppers did not even know they had. Number 9. Crushed oyster shells. The calcium foundation of the temple. When Solomon built the temple, the foundations were made of costly, hewn stone. For a pepper plant, the foundation of a strong harvest is a steady, long-term supply of calcium and minerals. Crushed oyster shells are a biblical-age soil amendment, used for millennia in coastal cultures. I have walked the shell middens of ancient villages, massive piles of discarded shells that are still leaching calcium into the soil thousands of years later. They are almost pure calcium carbonate, but in a heavy, chunky form that breaks down over years. This is not a quick fix. This is a legacy amendment. In addition to calcium, oyster shells contain chitin, the same substance that makes up insect exoskeletons. When you add chitin to your soil, it feeds a specific group of bacteria that produce chitinase, an enzyme that dissolves the cell walls of nematode eggs and fungal pathogens. Your pepper plants get the calcium they need, and the soil itself becomes a hostile environment for root knot nematodes, which are a common pepper pest. Here's the traditional use. Mix a generous amount of crushed oyster shells into your soil at the beginning of the season. It will buffer the pH, prevent blossom end rot, and slowly, silently, wage a biological war on the microscopic worms trying to destroy your roots. Think of it as laying a deep, lasting foundation of stone for your garden temple, a foundation that actively defends itself against the enemies that would undermine it, the shells of the sea now forming the bedrock of your harvest. Number 8. Charcoal dust. The black remnant of the burnt offering. The altar of the Old Testament was a place of fire and sacrifice, leaving behind charred wood. To an ancient eye, this was not trash. This was terra preta, the black earth of the Amazon, a soil so fertile it still regenerates itself thousands of years after it was created. I have made my own biochar in a shallow pit, watching the wood smolder under a layer of dirt, the smoke rising in thin wisps, and I have felt the connection to every farmer in history who has used fire to enrich the earth. Biochar, the modern term for this ancient practice, is charcoal that has been charged with nutrients and microbes. It is not a fertilizer in itself. It is a permanent condo structure for soil life. The microscopic pores in a single gram of biochar have the surface area of a tennis court. These pores house beneficial bacteria and fungi, protecting them from predators, and they hold onto water and nutrients, preventing them from leaching away during heavy rains. Here's the traditional use. You never add raw charcoal dust to your soil without charging it first. That raw dust will steal nutrients for the first year, acting like a sponge that absorbs everything and gives nothing back. You must soak it in a nutrient solution, like the fermented plant juice we mentioned, or urine or compost tea, for at least a week. Then mix it into your pepper beds. Once it is in the ground, it is there for centuries. Think of it as building a massive, subterranean city for the workforce that feeds your peppers, a permanent infrastructure upgrade that makes your soil more fertile every single year, the black remnant of the fire now becoming the eternal home of life. Number 7. Bone meal. The strength of the ancient flocks. The shepherd's life was one of complete reliance on the flock for food, fiber, and even soil fertility. When an animal was slaughtered for the table, nothing was wasted. The bones were dried and crushed. This bone meal is the phosphorus backbone of a pepper harvest. Phosphorus is the energy currency of the plant world, the P in ATP, the molecule that transfers energy in every living cell. It is especially critical for the formation of flowers and the development of fruit. A phosphorus-deficient pepper plant will be stunted, with purplish leaves, and will drop its flowers before they set fruit. You will see the little white flowers form, and then a day later they are on the ground, and no pepper follows. Modern bone meal is steamed and ground, making it more available than the ancient version, but the principle is the same. Here's the traditional use. Because bone meal is slow to break down and immobile in the soil, you must place it where the roots will find it. Mix a handful into the soil at the bottom of the planting hole. The phosphorus will sit there, waiting, until the roots grow down and tap into this vein of pure energy. Think of it as installing a dedicated power line straight from the soil to the developing fruit, ensuring that every flower cluster has the raw electrical charge it needs to swell into a massive, dense pepper, the strength of the ancient flocks now flowing into the fruit of your garden. Number 6. Blood meal. The life force of the first covenant. The book of Leviticus is explicit. The life of the flesh is in the blood. For the soil, this is a literal truth. Blood meal is dried, powdered animal blood, and it is the most concentrated natural source of nitrogen available. It is the rocket fuel of the organic gardening world. Nitrogen is the element of chlorophyll, the green pigment that captures sunlight. When you apply blood meal, your pepper leaves turn a dark, almost blue-green, and the plant enters a phase of rapid, vigorous growth. The danger is overuse, which can burn the roots with the heat of rapid decomposition and produce a lush, green bush with no peppers. I have made this mistake. I applied too much blood meal to a bed of young peppers, and within days the leaf edges turned brown and crispy, and the plants sulked for weeks. Here's the traditional use. A very light sprinkle of blood meal around the base of a young pepper plant, scratched in and watered deeply, will break it out of a growth stall. The soil bacteria attack the blood meal, releasing ammonia, which converts to nitrate, the form of nitrogen plants can use. This process generates heat, so keep it away from the stem. Think of it as a controlled transfusion, a direct injection of the very life force that drives photosynthesis, turning your pepper plant into a solar panel of extraordinary efficiency, the life of the flesh now powering the life of the leaf. Number 5. Aged manure. The humble fuel of the patriarch's field. Abraham was wealthy in livestock, and the flocks of Jacob were vast. The manure from these herds was not a waste problem. It was the engine of the farm. Modern gardeners often reach for fresh manure and burn their plants with ammonia. The ancient way was patience. Aged, composted manure is a completely different substance. It is a biological masterpiece, a complex matrix of digested fiber, billions of bacteria, and a balanced, slow-release supply of every macro and micronutrient a plant needs. For peppers, aged sheep or goat manure is particularly beneficial because it is drier, breaks down slower, and has a balanced NPK ratio that supports fruiting, not just leaf growth. Here's the traditional use. You must use manure that has been composted for at least 6 months. It should smell like earth, not ammonia. If it smells sharp or hot, it is not ready. Mix it into the soil before planting, or use it as a side dressing, a thick ring around the plant that slowly leaches nutrients with every watering. Think of it as a time-released capsule of pastoral abundance, a gift from the flock that builds the soil structure, feeds the worms, and provides a complete, balanced diet for your peppers from seedling to harvest. The humble fuel that powered the fields of the patriarchs now feeding your own garden. Number 4. Volcanic rock dust. The ground mountain of the Holy Land. The mountains of Israel, the Golan Heights, are volcanic in origin. The soils of these regions are famously fertile, not just because of organic matter, but because of the mineral composition of the rock itself. Glacial gravel dust, basalt dust, azomite. These are all modern terms for the ancient practice of remineralizing soil with finely ground rock. This is not a quick fix. This is a 100-year investment in the mineral bank account of your soil. Modern soil science has documented a broad spectrum of trace minerals in these rock dusts, elements like cobalt, molybdenum, boron, and selenium, which are often completely absent from synthetic fertilizers. These trace minerals are the cofactors for enzymatic reactions inside the pepper plant. Without boron, for example, a pepper plant cannot move calcium to the growing tip of the fruit, and you get blossom end rot even when there is plenty of calcium in the soil. Here's the traditional use. A single, heavy application of rock dust, raked into the soil surface at the start of the season, will slowly weather and release its minerals over years. It feeds the soil microbes, which in turn feed the plant. Think of it as grinding down the very mountains of creation and spreading that ancient, mineral-rich foundation across your garden, a one-time gift that keeps giving back every single season. The ground mountain now feeding the humble pepper with the patience of geological time. Number 3. Mycorrhizal fungi. The hidden network of the root system. There is a verse in the book of Job that speaks of the tree, that its root is wrapped about the heap, and seeth the place of stones. This is a poetic description of a mycorrhizal network. These fungi form a symbiotic relationship with the roots of your peppers, extending microscopic threads, hyphae, far out into the soil. In exchange for sugars the plant produces, the fungi bring back water and mineral nutrients, especially phosphorus, from distances the root could never reach. This is not a fertilizer. This is an extension of the plant itself. Modern research on pepper plants inoculated with mycorrhizal fungi shows a dramatic increase in drought tolerance and a significant boost in fruit yield compared to non-inoculated plants. The fungi also produce a protein called glomalin, which glues soil particles together, creating the perfect crumb structure that roots love. Here's the traditional use. When you transplant your pepper seedling, dust the bare roots with a granular mycorrhizal inoculant powder. Direct contact is essential. Once established, this partnership lasts for the life of the plant. Think of it as hiring 1,000,000 microscopic miners and water diviners, sending them out into the soil to tap every pocket of nutrition and every drop of moisture, and funneling it all directly into your pepper plant, a hidden network that was always there, waiting to be invited into your garden. Number 2. Compost, the black gold of the temple garden. In the book of Ezekiel, the waters that flow from the temple bring life to everything they touch, and the trees bear fruit for food and their leaves for medicine. Compost is the physical manifestation of that principle of restoration. It is not one thing. It is everything. It is the return of all organic matter to the soil, broken down by the microbial fire of decomposition into a dark, crumbly, sweet-smelling substance that is the foundation of all soil fertility. I have turned a compost pile in the cool of the morning, the steam rising from its heart, and I have felt the heat of life itself radiating from the decaying leaves and kitchen scraps. Modern science cannot replicate it. You cannot buy compost in a bottle. It contains humic and fulvic acids, which chelate minerals and make them cell permeable. It contains a universe of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, and nematodes that form a complete soil food web. It holds 6 times its weight in water and creates the perfect structure for pepper roots, which demand well-drained but consistently moist soil. Here's the traditional use. It is not just an amendment. It is the growing medium itself. Plant your peppers in a bed that is at least 30% high-quality, homemade compost. Then throughout the season, top dress with an inch of fresh compost as a mulch. Think of it as the resurrection of the dead, the taking of scraps, leaves, and waste, and transforming them through the alchemy of decay into the very substance of new life, the dark, beating heart of a garden that needs nothing else. Number 1. The fermented fruit of the ground. The liquid explosion. We have arrived at the final item, the one thing you can pour on your peppers and literally watch them explode with growth. This is the ancient secret that ties together everything we have discussed. In the book of Proverbs, it is written, "Honor the Lord with thy substance, and with the firstfruits of all thine increase. So shall thy barns be filled with plenty, and thy presses shall burst out with new wine." The key is the bursting of the press, the fermented fruit. This is not about alcohol for drinking. This is about the microbial and enzymatic explosion that occurs when fruit ferments. When you take overripe, blemished fruits, the ones you would never eat, and ferment them, you create a liquid that is absolutely saturated with plant growth hormones, potassium, and a specific strain of yeast that colonizes the leaf surface and protects against powdery mildew. Modern agricultural science has identified a compound in fermented fruit extracts called triacontanol, a natural growth stimulant that increases the rate of photosynthesis and protein synthesis. When alfalfa is fermented, it is a known source, but a fermented mash of bananas, mango skins, and apple cores creates a similar, profoundly powerful effect. Here's the traditional use. Fill a bucket a third of the way with chopped, overripe fruit, especially bananas for potassium. Cover with water. Add a handful of brown sugar or molasses to feed the fermentation. Cover with a cloth and let it sit for 1 week, stirring daily. It will bubble and foam. Strain the liquid. Dilute this liquid gold at a ratio of 1 part to 15 parts water. Pour it directly on the soil around your pepper plants, and missed a small amount on the leaves. The response is not subtle. Within days, you will see a flush of new dark green growth, a burst of flower buds, and the setting of fruit that is thick-walled, glossy, and abundant. Think of it as the bursting of the winepress, the final, ultimate offering of the harvest returned to the soil to fuel the next generation, a liquid so alive and so potent that it literally makes the plant explode with the joy of creation. This is the ancient way. It requires no synthetic bottles, no patented formulas, and no modern laboratories. It is the wisdom placed into the fabric of the world from the very beginning, a closed loop of life, death, and resurrection, playing out in your own backyard.